Sandy, if you do the roll call.
Rice? Here. Berkowitz?
Here.
Brooks?
Here.
Cowan? Markham?
Here.
I'm here. Euler? Here. Ogalla? Here. Summers?
Here.
Traynere?
Here.
We also have Denise Winfrey, Mark Ferry, and Mike Frizzalone present. We have a quorum.
Thank you. And now for the Pledge of Allegiance. Beth, would you read it?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have some meeting minutes from the November 13th, 2018.
Move. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Miscellaneous legislative reports. I don't know that we have anything per se. Nothing official anyway. Really, we're going to cover the federal and state agenda under new business since we're going to be going into a new year. So that doesn't really qualify as old business unless somebody has some old business. No, we'll move on from that one to new business. And the first thing is a request from NACO to do a resolution that was put forward by Don Moran. If you want to pass some of those down, who cares? To have an actual copy, but I did ask Don to bring forward some additional information about the resolution. In a nutshell, and I do mean like a nutshell because I don't have a lot of detail, when they deregulated the airline industry, apparently these air ambulances got deregulated as well. And basically, you need an air ambulance when you're almost dead. They picked you up on the side of the highway, you know, in pieces, and they're motorizing you over to Loyola or some other big fancy facility that, you know, takes care of people that are critically injured. And you don't get asked about what's the best price, which company you want to use. Do you want Southwest or United, you know, first class? And they just pick you up and they move you, and then they bill. And I don't believe, my understanding is insurance doesn't really cover this. So the individual is generally responsible, and they don't really have any choice in who's taking them. And so this is a resolution that NACO is looking for support for to, I guess, regulate air ambulances. And it's just a request. We can consider it. I don't think it needs to go on either our state or our federal agenda, but it's something that NACO's looking for us to show support for. So I'm here to listen to the will of the body. Any comments, questions?
This would require formal action and go on the town board then to be sent to NACO.
Yeah, so if somebody wants to make a motion, I would certainly entertain one.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, there we go. That was simple. Get back to my other agenda here. Or not, because the machine doesn't work real fast. There we go. The next thing is discussion of the state legislation fiscal year 19 agenda. We have the old one. I think you guys had a chance to take a look at that on your agenda there. Basically, I had some conversations with the executive's office, with Nick Palmer, also with our state lobbyist, Brent Hassard, and we just went through the issues that were here last time. Talked a little bit about them, how they might relate to ISACO, our new organization, our new statewide organization, things that may be passed, things that maybe we wanted to keep on the agenda, some things maybe that we wanted to remove. Nick, would you want to come up and add your 2 cents?
What are we talking about, the state agenda?
State agenda, yeah. Just from the county executive's position.
Well, I mean, I think the one thing we all, I think, at least of those that I've met with thus far, is we can strengthen our infrastructure section of the agenda, particularly because this session of the General Assembly, there could be a capital bill. There's been a lot of talk of a capital bill, so I think that is why board members were solicited for their ideas for projects in your district. If you don't know any, or don't feel strongly about one, that's okay, because we're going to have more discussion, I think, through some of the other committees and presentations that are coming on both what DOT, our Department of Transportation, Highways Department, whatever you want to call it, and our freight study. Some of you are very familiar with that, some of you not as much. So we're going to talk about that more, but that's why we want to strengthen the infrastructure section, because we want to be very specific to legislators. And there's been some new legislators elected in Will County, so we want to be able to tell them, here's a priority. And even if there's not a county highway in their district, there may be a state highway or other municipal road that needs improvement. And when we look at this stuff, I'm not going to go too far into the weeds, but when we look at this stuff, we'd like to look at it both from a transportation, especially safety standpoint, but also investments lead to economic development and other quality of life issues. So that's in all these issues, and I don't want to get into the weeds in that, but infrastructure is definitely something we want to strengthen. The other point, I think, from the executive's office is we think we can dial up or be a little more specific on the financial side of things, because in recent years the counties and municipalities have been hit with different reductions in dedicated funding from the state, the local distributive fund. There's an administrative fee put on our on some of the taxes that are collected, and we think, we understand the state's got financial problems, but don't push them back to us, because we've made the tough choices in Will County to balance our budgets, to build up our cash reserves, to have a AA+ bond rating, and we don't want that to be impacted. So we think we can strengthen that a little bit. We're working on that. So, but we're also, from the executive's office and working with this committee, we want to always, as always, I should say, work together and try to find issues that we all can get on board with and advocate for. And sometimes that's defensive things, like saying no to bills that are bad for us, but sometimes it's taking proactive stances of pushing legislation that's good for Will County. And some may just be for Will County unique, some may be for part of the ASACO and things like that. So.
And a lot of what Nick says is kind of summarized on page 5. It talks about our opposing unfunded mandates, legislation that reduces our existing authority, and so on and so forth. So you get a good summary of where the board's position has been in previous years. And so what I'm looking for, actually, from all of you, and I think I've mentioned this in an email, but I'll mention it here in committee, is ideas for things you want to take up. I have one I want to take up. Warehouses are an issue in Will County. The pay of workers has been an issue in Will County. It's kind of calmed down a little bit over the last couple of years, but I know there were constituent groups, activist groups that were protesting wage theft and so on in 2013, 2014, around there, 2015, that era. An issue that's been brought to light to me, and it's certainly come up at the Joliet City Council, is the use of temporary employees and the abuse thereof. Wage theft, kind of a little bit of deception on the part of the employer. If I'm a temporary employee and I've been working for you for 6 years, 5 years, 4 years, am I really a temporary employee? These are the kinds of things we're hearing from workers that work in these warehouse facilities and elsewhere. And so with the permission, I guess, of our group, I do want to bring somebody here next month to talk about a study that was done interviewing a variety of temporary workers in various industries all over the state, and let them talk to you about what they found, and kind of educate our committee a little bit on what some of the problems are. Because if you don't work in that industry or in those areas, you probably don't have a clue of what it's like to walk in their shoes. And so I thought bringing that forward would be good. And if anybody has anything else, Lori?
I know one of the ways that they were getting around some of that is they were sharing it with warehouse A and B, C. Give you so many hours here, so many hours there, so many hours here, and I'm not sure if that's still how it works, but people were getting injured and they're not being taken care of.
Very much so. And in fact, I guess there's a rule that if you're a temporary employee and you get sent to an employer and you show up for work and the employer decides, we don't really need you today, they're supposed to pay you for 4 hours. Doesn't really happen too often from what I heard at the presentation I was at. So there's a lot of issues there with that particular thing. And given that Will County seems to be the largest intermodal in the world and lots of warehouses, and not just in Joliet and Elwood, but they're in Bolingbrook. I'm sure there's a bunch out by you, Judy, in the Monee area. I don't know exactly where they all are. I'm not that familiar.
We've got Amazon in Money.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what I was thinking of.
There's Amazon and then there's some cities that are on the north side, but not quite as many as they
Right.
go toward Bolingbrook.
Right.
Was done. So,
Yes, we have a lot of them. So I want to bring that issue forward, but we are looking for new ideas for the state agenda, things we could take up on a state level. Tyler?
In judicial, a few months ago, we talked about the state passed a bill for how they fund specialty courts, and we were going to bring that to legislative. So we haven't had a judicial meeting to go into further detail about it, but it's something that we wanted to keep our eye out. I know Nick and I talked about that, about bringing it here.
Yeah, I don't
So-
think that wasn't anything we talked about the other day,
Yeah,
was
so
it?
after,
Or am I wrong?
I mean, we've talked in the past about specialty courts, but also really a lot of the things the state funds, the River Valley,
Yeah, we did.
the health department, I mean, things like that. Those are all things that are financial in nature, but if they don't fund them, then either we fund them or we cut the services. So that's something we should look at. And there's still potential more criminal justice reform in Illinois coming too. So that's something this committee probably is going to need to monitor. So.
and we haven't had a judicial meeting with the new board members yet, so after that, I'll bring up more information, but that's something that we wanted to keep on the radar, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody could remind each other to keep that on our agenda.
Yeah, please. Nick, did the list of all the legislators, the new ones, the existing ones that got reelected, that memo you gave me, has that been shared with everybody?
That was for you guys, but I can share it with the board office to distribute. I created a list just because for me, sometimes I forget who is which district, so I made a list of all our current, and they're going to be sworn in, I think, tomorrow, all the new state senators and state reps, because we have quite a few in Will County, so those are people we should be communicating with. So, but I'll get that over to the board office. So.
We'll be getting contact information for them pretty soon. And then there was, I think Beth mentioned it to me, the legislative session calendar, I think, was it you or Lonnie? Did you guys all get that? Okay, all right, I just want to make sure everybody got that. Go ahead, Mark.
Nick and I also just want the committee to know that, we've taken a look at what we presented last year in our book, and that we sort of had a discussion and committed to Jackie that, we're going to step up our game, because, the way that we present it to the legislators is going to allow them to have the information quickly for them to look at, to see what our priorities are. So just so you know that.
and this can be ongoing discussion, correct?
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
Because there's going to be stuff that definitely we're going to want to bring up from public health and safety as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's one issues with funds being sent from time to time, that type of thing, what else, more
Yeah.
monies.
No, and I do want to have a meeting with Sue, I think she's sitting out there, to talk more about mental health funding and what we can do in the health
What we're going to
department.
be covering anybody,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
We can bring that forward.
Definitely want to add more things to the state agenda in that regard. Looking at things that will help quality of life for the people that live in Will County and work in Will County that we represent, so it's important.
New people, could we somehow get like a rundown on what the status is of the things that were in the 2018?
Yeah, I mean, we
I mean,
have,
not now, obviously,
no,
but like.
we did this just the other day.
Well, for the state agenda, I mean, we could go through them, but I mean, there's some of them, and I'll get into this when I talk about the federal agenda. Sometimes we take a promoting legislation, sometimes we're opposing legislation, sometimes it's just education. But at the state level, as we all know, there's been a lot of stagnation there, so it's more nuanced bills. There's not been, like this year, with the prospect of a capital bill, there's gonna be a lot more movement, I think, potentially. But, I mean, like I-55 was in there, and both our agendas, I mean, that's moving forward. But then there's things like probation funding we're still talking about, our freight study we're still talking about, and implementing things.
And that bad legislation.
Right. So we need to, I mean, we can go through that, and maybe at the next committee, as we're gathering ideas, we try to gather them from elected officials, from board members, from outside groups that are pushing legislation, and try to bring them all. So by the next committee, the hope is we would have a draft of a lot of those ideas, and sometimes the committee has approved kind of the concept, and we bring the final to the full board once it's all been tweaked, and then even that we dress up a little more. So,
Yeah.
but
I guess I was just curious if we needed to continue to address, like if
Oh,
I
yes.
wanted to say, oh, I'm interested in
Right.
this, that's already.
So that actually was the purpose of my asking Nick to meet. So we went through the whole thing, and there's basically only one thing on here that's like no longer needed, and that's the Weber Interstate 55 interchange, because the state.
That's the short answer.
Yeah, that's the short answer. That's the only thing that we know is like kind of completely off the table. There are some things we might want to change our position on, or remove, or maybe move to the federal agenda, or maybe still keep on a radar screen, but maybe through ISACO rather than through the county's agenda, that kind of thing. Mike?
Yeah, you know, this booklet is a marketing piece. And as with all marketing pieces, you have to look at, you know, what is the low-hanging fruit? Not that it's low-hanging, but obviously the capital bill is going to be the main focus, I think, of this administration for the year. Probation stuff and the specialty courts, that's going to be under the radar. It's going to take a little while, not that we should eliminate it, but I think we have to key, the first thing they see when they open a book is just about capital. Listing projects that we're interested in, because that's we want to be first in line to say, these are the things that could fit the first thing that's on your agenda. The other stuff will be in your agenda at some time, probably not this year, but I think we need to key off of those.
Yeah, Judy?
Yeah, in the past, Jackie, the agenda was full, so many, it was like a wish list, like a little kid would write for instance, saying, I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this. And I learned.
Oh, Santa Claus.
Right, or Santa, absolutely. But you know, with working with the Farm Bureau, we go down with a very concrete list of things. And then we also in there say whether we oppose it or support it or something like that. So if there's something that we would oppose, like in here, the beginning thing where we have about property tax assessment, we sort of oppose continuing to give more exemptions because then
The rest of us carry
the
the
rest of
burden.
us keep paying more, right? So that makes it harder on everybody else. So different kinds of things like that. So it was better when we did shrink it down and become very focused and put it into an issue like transportation infrastructure, which it wasn't like that before. So there's been improvements, and you can always improve on something continually.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. It's called progress.
So would we remove then the pet? I know that did not go anywhere.
I'm not inclined to want to keep that, Judy. That's
So that
just
would be
my
something we'd
opinion.
probably remove, right?
Yeah, and like the thing on the polling places, I mean, I can't speak for the whole county, but in my area, all the schools do close on election day. I am far and away much more in favor of moving to the federal agenda. The idea of a national holiday for voting. You know, I've heard conversation out there that, you know, we can't afford to add any more national holidays to anybody, but, you know, we could clearly recognize Columbus on election day and just call it Columbus Day, voting day, and do it on November, you know, the second Tuesday in November. It just, you know, it does become a problem finding polling places, but I noticed that our new county clerk walked in the room, so I'm going to put you on the spot, Lauren.
She looks around.
Yeah. I mean, are we having issues with the schools throughout the county? I can only speak to my township. The schools close for election day. They just close. And the parents have to find something to do with their kids.
Right.
Sometimes they actually bring them to the polling place
Yeah, that's a
if they decide to vote.
right. Right. That's not a bad idea either. You know, we don't know exactly yet all of the, you know, issues we're having. I've talked to Plainfield though, they close there are a lot of schools that do close, but there are a lot that don't. So,
Yeah, it's a problem, and it's about safety for the kids. I know that we've taken that issue up both in the health department agenda, and I think maybe even in legislative, where we've talked about the safety of our kids in the schools. And, you know, on election day, the school has to be open to any voter that wants to come in, and, you know, that could potentially allow for other things, unintended consequences, I guess.
Warren, they did move one of the schools. Columbia got moved into the old school that is no longer functioning as a school, as one of the voting places out by us.
I'm not sure yet.
So,
But,
yeah.
I mean, ideally, you know, the schools all close and we can use those because, I mean, we haven't, you know, been able to explore all of, or hardly any, you know, options yet as far as polling places, but from what I understand, it isn't easy to find them.
Well,
You know, and obviously we would like to have
yeah.
options.
They have to be accessible, they have to be public, they
Right.
have to be located near the precinct. I mean, I'm not the clerk, but I know there's got to be a lot of rules. I saw the rules for courtrooms, so.
Right.
Right now, our staff is going through the process of you know, securing those, you know, those polling places. You know, they have raised concerns, they know that school districts have raised concerns about safety, you know, if their schools are open. They've also raised concerns about costs, you know, when the schools are closed. You know, we recognize that you know, in some districts they view this as a hardship, but we also have problems, you know, maintaining polling places that aren't in school districts. They are very accessible. There's always ample parking in most of these school districts, and yet we find it in places that aren't school districts that there are, you know, there may be parking issues, there may be space issues, and all these other things as well. So that's, you know, part of what we're looking at right now. So.
Is there anything else you want to comment on in the agenda from last time?
We were just gonna come and, you know, step in and listen today, see if there was anything that we could add or.
All right.
I
Yeah,
wanted to
sure.
add, in our district, I think everyone's fairly comfortable with the arrangement. I believe our schools are comfortable with it. One thing I would want to do is avoid creating another day off for these kids out of school because they don't need another day off if we have to, you know, try to figure out a different arrangement. I've gotten some feedback regarding the costs of early voting that our townships have incurred, and I would suspect in other areas of Will County they've incurred these additional expenses as well. So that might be something that we should start to discuss a little bit too, because it seems like early voting is here to stay. If it is, that's important, you know, the cost.
We had
For
almost
that.
1/3 of the voters in DuPage Township vote early. And that doesn't even count the vote by mail. That's just the people that came to vote early. And so, you know, clearly there's an appetite by voters to have more flexibility in the ability to vote. And if you don't do say a federal holiday for it, then there are other alternatives. I mean, I think it's Washington State, Oregon State, I'm not sure who else does the vote by mail. California. I mean, we could push for that. Voting is not a federal thing in general, like, let me be more specific. The rules for voting vary by state. Each state has control over that. And they can decide what elections get held when and how the residents can vote. And so, you know, we could put that on our agenda, vote, you know, for vote by mail for the entire state.
Just to clarify, Julie, our schools do close on voting day.
Oh, I know they do, and we don't have a problem with it, we're used to it. They may say, I know a couple of the school staff has mentioned, well, it's kind of hard, you know, to have the day off, but everyone's used to it. There isn't any issue with it. The jurors like the location, so I think it works in at least our district. But I wouldn't want to see the kids have another day off of school.
Why would they get another day off?
Well,
They're already
if
off
we
on
were to
election day.
change the arrangement in other parts of the county, let's say it doesn't work in in other schools, or we try to use other schools that,
I'm trying to understand why the kids would get another day off. I'm missing the point.
So in voting in all areas, it doesn't have schools.
I guess
In
you're
all
saying not
districts,
in
we
our
don't all
area,
vote in
in
schools.
places where they don't already have a
Right.
sick day.
So in that district, the Naperville area, they vote at schools.
Yeah, same in both.
And they don't like in my district, they vote different
Right.
places.
So you're saying you don't want to see her kids get a day off?
well, I think that, yeah.
They might be upset by that. They may not think that's fair that they got to go to school and we get it off, you know?
But here's the other thing too, with the cost of the early voting, I think one of the things we should, we really need to see, what does this cost us? And then, and because our township expressed a little bit of a struggle with the cost and the salaries.
Well, you know, I mean,
And
that's
the
certainly,
personnel.
we could potentially solicit the townships for information on if they kept track of what their costs are to conduct an election. And the clerk's office as well, you know, what additional, if any, expenses the clerk's office undergoes because we allow early voting. I'm not in favor of eliminating early voting, not even a little, not on your life. I am in favor of vote by mail, and that would eliminate the need for polling places, eliminate the need for election judges, probably create a need for something else, because I'm assuming there would be verification processes and so forth that would have to be followed up on if you're doing stuff by mail. Go ahead. Yes. Sorry.
Where I live is in the Aurora section of the county, which is in the far northwest corner. Oswego School District, we do close our schools for voting, and then we proceeded not to use them at all and cram 3 precincts into 1 church for polling. We tend to use the churches and the clubhouses in our area. So I guess for me, closing school, I struggle with that just because I think kids should see the process, but I do understand the safety of it. I also like national holiday for voting. But I think that one of my things I was going to talk to Lauren about eventually was just to kind of say, hey, this is how the last election went. We need to look at the polling places because we shouldn't put 3 huge subdivisions, polling places into 1 church. That just creates
Confusion.
Mass chaos. Myself and the alderman spent all day making sure people who got to the wrong polling place got to the right polling place. And that makes people really, really mad when they show up to vote and they're not in the same place they were last year or they didn't get notified, according to them.
According to them, yeah.
Right.
Because we know they
But I
got
never received anything in Aurora from the county clerk. All the stuff that they said they mailed out to the whole county, I never got anything.
You didn't get a sample
Nope.
ballot of the white thing?
Nope. So, and I asked several neighbors, and I went on their Facebook page, and nobody could show me. I said, did anyone get this? So.
Are you sure you're registered?
Right, I am. I knocked on my own door several times. No.
Well, like I said, I'm definitely interested in hearing from everybody on the committee with ideas, or, you know, things may come up during the year, like Lori mentioned, stuff's gonna happen during the year, even after we finalize the state agenda. So if there's anything that you want to see get on there, wake up, iPad. I gotta tell it to stop going to sleep. Please let us know, because we really do want to be responsive to everybody on the board and certainly within the committee. I'm trying to get my agenda back. This thing goes to sleep. So the next thing is the federal agenda. So Nick, you can stay right where you are.
So this is somewhat similar, but not exactly the same as the state agenda. This is a copy of our federal agenda. It is available in electronic format. A lot of you, I think, have seen this already. I would encourage you to review it. But with our federal agenda, we've had a federal lobby for a number of years. Smith, Dawson, and Andrews. When we originally started, it was more, well, I think it's fair to say, they both did advocacy for earmarks back then, because there were still earmarks around, and we were successful in getting some larger earmarks. When earmarks were done away with, we shifted our focus more to federal grants and agency advocacy. We create this agenda every year. It is an informational document as much as an advocacy document. Many of our congressional representatives read it. I mean, before we get there, they've read it and have questions ready. But it's so the focus is really the education of our delegation. In the past, earmarks, which could come back, and then the agency advocacy. And when I say agency advocacy, we've gone to places like the Department of Labor, who handles workforce service issues, and talked about things we'd like to see in rewrites of those bills. When we've talked about the WRDA bill, which is the Water Resource Development Act, we've talked about things like the DuPage River study. We've gone to the EPA to talk about issues. We've gone to the Army Corps. So we get into agencies, and that's really beneficial to the county, because when we're in there, sometimes we get legal insider information, advance notice of grants, things like that. They tell us, you know, what we could do better in our grant application, so that's been helpful. But the success, and I think it's important just to start with, we had those earmarks early on. We got money for like sheriff's iWin laptops and some road funding. In recent years, when we shifted to the advocacy work, we just had a big success recently on the Prairie View landfill, which the county runs with the help of our private sector partner, Waste Management. We had some legislative change there, which makes a big deal for revenue for the county, but also keeping the cost down. So there are values to that. The book is a joint effort between the county board and the county executive. It's laid out by kind of major areas, authorizations, which are when they're doing those major bill rewrites, which some of them are periodic. Regional priorities speaks for itself. Federal programs are things like Community Development Block Grant, CDBG, or other big issues that the feds are working on and have like regular funding. County projects are specific county projects that we're interested in, such as like the I-55 Weber Road Corridor, public safety, et cetera. And then in the back, we always have put a Will County overview. We include all the board members, what committees you're on, information about just the general demographics of the county, a section on workforce so that our members of Congress and their staff have a ready guide. I think it's been said already that they have a resource to go to if they want to get what's the general employment rate, what are types of jobs in Will County, and then we've done some other economics information there. Jackie and I and Maura and several other folks have met. We are looking in the vein of what's already been discussed, streamlining this a little bit. There's always more we could put in here, and I think it's appropriate the way it is, but we can streamline it. Some of the things are going to come off because they have moved, and I'm not going to go through every line, but I'll just point out a few. Like the Federal Aviation Administration, their rewrite was approved, and Lewis Airport, there's an issue there with the tower that's basically been dealt with, so those are going to come off. There's some other issues like the I-55 Weber Road. We feel like even though it's an ongoing project, it's unlikely that we're going to get any funding for that. So we're going to probably remove that and move on to other infrastructure projects. There's a number of items related to criminal justice and technology issues. I think the thought was, and I just met with the Sheriff's Office yesterday, we're going to have more conversation, but possibly combining some of that under like a hybrid of just here's what we're doing successfully in Will County with the consolidation, their public safety complex, the new courthouse, etc. We still have X, Y, and Z needs. Because we still have a lot of technology needs, and that is funded through some of the Department of Justice or DOJ funding streams.
Did you talk with Brian? Is that who you met with yesterday in the Sheriff's Office? I haven't met Brian yet, but I have a feeling he's here.
Yes.
I do know Brian. I know Brian's face. Okay.
So we're going to work on that. If there's ideas board members have, feel free to run to Maura or to me and we'll investigate them. Some may be appropriate to put in the agenda, some may be to investigate separately. Everything doesn't have to be in our federal or state agenda for us to advocate for it or oppose. The agenda is intended to be a streamlined, as Mike Frizzlin said, a marketing document. So when we go in, and some of you have done this, when we go into a congressional office, we have a very short window of time. So we're going to open the book to the areas we want to highlight, focus on those, talk about those, and get out. But they still have the book as a resource, and that's why the federal agenda book has been written a little longer window, but it's also because we're trying to educate them, and we've had success, we've gotten good feedback.
Nick, do they get that book beforehand? Because normally we hand it to them when we get there. Do they already have it?
a lot of times they've had a copy
They have,
already
okay.
given it to them. Because for example, Congressman Foster has read it front to back.
Because I know we went in Durbin's office the first time we saw it.
Right, well, there's the other thing, so for the education of new members, there's several waves of people that go from Will County to Washington each year. There's a NACO legislative conference, which is coming up at the beginning of March, and that's usually a certain number of board members participate in that. Whether they go and meet with delegation or not, it depends. But usually that's more focused on NACO. Then a very small delegation from the county board and county executive's office goes sometimes the end of March, at the beginning of April, and we go and we get all 6 of our congressmen, because we have 6 congressional members, 2 senators, and then we do the agencies that are relevant for that year's agenda. So we do that, and then there have been special trips before. We went last 2 years ago now, I guess it is. We went and specifically presented our freight study to a mixture of both our delegation and other staff from key transportation members, so members who aren't necessarily even from Illinois, but they came to hear about the inland port and our role in the national economy. But in addition to what county does, CED, Center for Economic Development, which is our business kind of economic development partner, they often send a delegation out there, and they have their own book, but they're talking about some of the same issues. And then the Will County Governmental League, which represents municipalities largely, but we're a member, they often have a delegation too, which they're focused again on their issues, but some of those issues overlap. So members of Congress and the 2 senators that represent Will County get multiple hits, which we think is a good thing, because throughout the spring, every 3-4 weeks, they're getting somebody, in addition to other groups that may be totally untied to us, but are there advocating for this stuff. So there are a couple things that I'll mention today. You'll see actual text review, but we've done a few things in the past. The DuPage River Study was an effort that begins actually up in DuPage County, comes through Will County, and impacts a lot of county board districts, a lot of municipalities. We were selected through a process to have this initial study, and there's a name for it, I forget, but it's basically an assessment of if we do X improvements, what will be the return on that investment. The county actually paid a portion of that as a match with Will County and DuPage County. We actually ended up paying more because the state didn't have the money, and we thought the study was worthwhile enough, so Will and DuPage both stepped up their match, and that study initial study has been completed.
Can you talk a little bit, if you know, and you may not know, but specifically what the study was about, what the purpose of the study was?
Right. Okay. So high level, and I defer to the experts on the real minutia, but the DuPage River, which I live near, is constantly major storms, floods, and the Plainfield area is probably hit the hardest. Southern portion of Wheatland is also hit, and it causes residential damage, commercial damage, can close roads at times. That all has a cost, and so the study was looking at what can be done to mitigate that so there's not as much damage, because when it's flood damage, that often is personal flood insurance, or even the feds and the state and others pay for some of that cost to rectify the situation. So the goal is to try to minimize that so it's very small, or much less than what it is. So the study looked at what efforts can be done. And I think there was a more ambitious hope that there would be a lot more things that could be done. There's not as much that can be done. You can widen it, you can remove debris, you can buy properties, which the feds have done in the past, properties that are in floodplains that probably never should have built on in the first place, and they've converted some of those to parks or things that can flood, and it's not going to damage property. It'll just be wet for a while and dry out. But this study has been completed. There's been an assessment done. Now you have the second phase of this DuPage River study, or as part of the WRDA bill, which again is the Water Resource Development Act. You go back to Congress, and Congress has to appropriate the money to actually do the work. And if you didn't meet the threshold of it was great enough return on investment, they wouldn't do it. We're above the threshold. It's worth doing some of these projects. So that's the plan. So we're going to include that in there. Whether it happens in 2019, 2020, who knows, but...
It does work. I mean, we've had this problem in Bolingbrook. When Bolingbrook was first incorporated, the builders just pretty much built wherever they wanted, and the Lily Cachet Creek was right behind their houses, and you had this whole section of an older part of Bolingbrook that would flood every time it rained. And, you know, the village ended up buying up these properties and turning it into what Nick was talking about, like not a wetland area, but certainly an area that could get wet, and it's not gonna hurt anything. Because these floods are real expensive, and they've had a lot of them in Lyle, Naperville. You know, it's been just north of us in DuPage County, probably, well, I remember all the way up to Des Plaines even having,
Nick, can you
Des Plaines,
share
Illinois.
the results of that first study with us?
I believe there was a report that was done, so I can get it. That, just for board members' sake.
And we could get
I'll see.
somebody to come
But that,
talk.
the Army Corps is the federal agency that works on that, but that has been through the land use committee, so there's probably some documentation. I'll double check.
Stormwater did.
And stormwater, I think it was stormwater and maybe land use
Yes,
too, so
together.
there's been a couple. But our stormwater committee is really the committee that would be the lead for the county on that too.
But keep in mind, the stormwater committee is a committee, they don't have money.
They have
So-
some,
Not enough to fix our
Right,
problems.
right.
We have major problems. Judy?
Right, so that was one of my things I was gonna ask. The money that we do put aside every year for stormwater committee, is that gonna be going back because it was diverted to pay for that study?
Yeah, it is gonna eventually go back, but there's a few more things that they're gonna be doing
Yeah.
in fiscal year 19 that's tying in with that. So we're hoping, well, the hopes that we're still gonna get that funding back from, you know, even, hopefully
I
we'll
mean,
get it.
the hope is, I mean, it's a process and it's a long process, but the hope is that that effort was not for nothing, that it will actually generate
Pay off.
more. But this is part of, I think, the idea is government accountability, that you're not going to spend money on something that's not going to pay a return on investment. And it does impact, I mean, beyond all those communities that are outside of Will, that Jack mentioned, there's a lot of impact in Will County, up through Plainfield and down towards Joliet, and I think even down towards Shannon, it ends up down that way, so I'll see what I can find and we'll get that to this committee.
Thank
Because
you.
we're gonna talk, the one last thing, I know we've got a couple other items to talk about, is the opioids issue. I know has been a big issue for all of the county, all of Chicago, the country. It's become a bigger issue, and some of you have heard me say this before, but I'm gonna say it again. Years ago, Will County went on one of our federal agenda trips. We went to the Office of National Drug Control Policy. This is probably 10 or 12 years ago. And back then, opioids wasn't on people's radar. They were talking about meth labs, which is still a problem, but in other parts of the country, it's a bigger issue. We'd like to think we were one of the many voices saying opioids is becoming a bigger issue. Fast forward to the present, now it's a national priority, it's a state priority. We're getting some funding through, a lot of this money comes from the feds, down to the state, down to the local level. We are getting some of that money already. That's what Dr. Burke is doing. Some of the sheriffs receive some grant funding. I think there's other agencies in Will County that receive funding. But this is still a major issue. Kathleen Burke gives reports to the Public Health Committee, but this is going to be a major, probably, section of the federal agenda or proposed agenda, and it'll probably be on our state agenda too, because there is some state efforts too. But I will say, I've been working with Maura and Speaker Winfrey and others. We are planning, hopefully, to have a committee of the whole sometime in the near future. And because of relationships we just have with folks, and because of our federal efforts, we've gone to Health and Human Services, which is the federal kind of health agency, and spoke to them a couple times about what we're doing. Well, their regional director is a guy named Doug O'Brien. He's for the Midwest. He's going to come to a board meeting, give a presentation what the feds are doing, but also in concert with what all our county agencies are doing. And at that same committee of the whole, we hope to make presentations by our individual people. So the executive's office, the sheriff's office, the state's attorney, the health department, others, so that we're getting information, but also sharing information, and that'll be a good, I think, overview for board members, especially those who haven't been as involved, to see what's already being done, but also there's still always more work to be done. So that's coming soon. So,
And if you want to know more about it, Kathleen Burke's office is right outside to the left here. We do the Heroes Helps program every year, if you haven't heard of that. I know Congressman Foster has also put on a presentation, like a panel discussion, in concert with Jim Glasgow with the Sheriff's Office. believe Kathleen Burke was at that too, and other stakeholders. So there's a lot of ways to get educated about what's going on in our county, our state. Mike?
Again, it's a marketing piece, and I think our agenda winds up being an overview in a lot of cases. So I think if we pick a couple of issues, like the drug initiative or transportation, we should make separate booklets on that. That's our federal transportation agenda or our federal drug initiative agenda, so that when we go to specific departments, we have that information to get, because I don't care about the other stuff that's in our agenda.
Not a bad idea, Mike.
And especially if we're going to do a big presentation, all of that information to be put in just a drug initiative agenda.
Very good idea. Uh-huh.
Jackie, every month, we have updates on this. Every month. It's Judy started that, we're gonna continue doing that. And as well as having Sue come in and talk about the initiatives. And one of the big things that we push for, besides the opioid, which is all the time, is the mental health initiatives too.
Jackie? For all of us new board members, can Dr. Burke provide us with an overview of her role, her,
Probably
what
more
she
likely
does?
in the health.
We can do that
I
at
mean,
public health.
yeah.
Get her that's my plan for the first
Thank you.
Probably, yeah.
We are,
Absolutely.
Nick and I are gonna work with Jackie and with Speaker Winfrey and the leaders of both caucuses to hopefully have a committee of the whole regarding the issue, as Nick was saying, so that we can cover all the bases.
Yeah, we'll get everybody up to speed. I think we're ready to move on from this, but this agenda, same thing, if you have ideas, things that should go on the federal agenda. Nick mentioned some of the things that we're either taking off or consolidating, but it's a work in progress. It is put together annually. My understanding when we were on the phone talking with our lobbyist is that it's a joint project that we do with them, trying to pick out the best things. As Mike suggested, maybe highlight one area in a separate booklet, but it's something that we do jointly with the lobbyists.
Just one last thing, if any board member wants to sit down and go in more detail, our office and more in the county board office, we can go through that. So, I mean, if anybody, or has a particular interest you just want to flush out, we can get on the phone with Smith Dawson or our state lobbyist and do that. So we're happy to do that outside of committees, so that way you have more time. So.
Right. And I do want to recognize that Leanne Goodson is here from, I guess, is it Curry and Associates? Yes. Okay, I didn't want to get the name wrong. She works with Julie Curry and Brent Hassard on the state agenda, and I met with her last week just going over the state agenda just to find out exactly what you were talking about. What got finished, what didn't, what do we want to carry forward, and how do we want to put this together for the coming year. Beth?
Thanks for the overview, Nick. I was just curious, who's the technical author of both agendas? Is it I realize, meaning the person that actually puts the words to it? Is it really taking a bunch of different people's write-ups and accumulating into one document?
The federal agenda, I mean, we have lobbies for both. So the federal agenda, Brett Garson is kind of the account manager, if you will, for Will County. Jim Smith is the principal. They both come out when they come to these. But Brett initially writes the Washington speak, and then sometimes I dumb it down for regular people. So it's a joint effort, and this committee is a big part of that. The state agenda has been more of a product of the committee and the lobbyists too, but I think just because we haven't, I've discovered that we haven't, the state lobbyist doesn't create it as much as we create things and they review it. So we're trying to beef it up a little more just because of what, like Mike Frizzle said, the infrastructure thing is a big issue for Will County.
I guess what I mean for the state agenda, really I mean to ask who actually is the author of the state agenda?
I mean, the committee is.
Who types it up and gets it ready to print?
I mean, it's
Okay, staff does.
Yeah.
The state
The state.
county board staff takes care of it.
Mhm.
But to what Nick said too, a lot of the things in the state agenda, I think, comes from the individual departments since they know. So I'm thinking like from Sue or Rhonda or
Warren,
Dean,
the sheriff's
they
department.
wrote
There's
their
things
own
in there.
paragraph, and then the lobbyist might tweak it some. But I think in the past, we've relied on those departments since it's their issue and they're the expert on how it affects.
And also the legislators all weigh in too, Beth, so, you know, we work with them, right, Nick?
I mean, at times, there's bills that our local legislators are pushing, but the other thing, just, I think this is important to mention, if there's an issue that Will County or an individual board member is interested in, I think you, and you're gonna cover this maybe next, is bring it to the committee, but sometimes you have to find a sponsor to carry the bill. And it may not even be a Will County sponsor. There may be somebody else who's from another Collier County or downstate that's pushing that issue, and we reach out to them and see what it's about. But any issue can be considered, but you have to, the thing is it relevant to what we have authority and jurisdiction to do? Because we don't have, I think this has always been, for the 14 years I've been here, we don't have to take a position on every bill, nor is it even practical. It's more what's relevant, what has a direct impact, what we have authority over, or what is this board passionate about that they want to take a position in favor of or in opposition, so.
And that doesn't mean that the issue isn't important. Maybe another body is going to take it up, as Nick mentioned, like this new state organization, ASACO, Illinois State Association of County Organizations. There you go, I almost had it. And it's made up of county-wide elected officials and county board members and/or / commissioners and various constituency groups. And it was quite a long laundry list. I don't know if I actually have it here, but we have a representative on there. It's actually going to be Mimi. And it's made up of 4 members from Cook County, 3 members from the Collier counties, 1 large county board caucus rep, 1 urban county, no, what is the, no, UCCI is United Council of Counties, right?
There, you know what, this is still information, and I don't mean to correct you, Jackie, but
Oh.
this is, some of this is still information, but there's varying levels. There's a board, which is what you're just describing.
Yeah.
That's Denise is the rep on that, but then there's a group that's like the countywide electeds, which that's been in existence for a long time. This is being incorporated. That's where county
I
executives.
didn't bring your drawing.
No, that's okay. I
Sorry.
sketched it out. Sorry. And then there's a large county board caucus, which that's the one Mimi's being nominated for. And then there's going to be a rural caucus, but that's only for counties less than 100,000. And then there's been talk of a legislative committee too. So all this is going to funnel up kind of like in the model of an ACO. But that's probably another meeting, another day to talk about the whole structure, and that's still kind of being formed.
Yeah, but they're going to take issues that we don't take, right?
I mean, the NACO takes on big issues, but they're talking it from a macro level. ASACO could do some of that. It's more localized because it's a state organization. But there are issues that they're going to take from probably a macro level, but that doesn't eliminate our need to speak to some of these issues from how it impacts Will County. So some of them we're going to push up to them. Some we may say we don't want to take down here, it's better kept up there. But that again is your call as the board. You get to decide that. So
one example of that is the air ambulance thing.
Right,
so,
right. That's like a NACO thing, and we're not going to do anything on it locally other than potentially
Support
pass a resolution of support. So on item 4, it says responsibility of the legislative committee. Does anybody have any questions on what our responsibility is? I mean, I think you kind of heard a really good overview of stuff that we've done, stuff we're doing, stuff we plan to do. So then we'll go on to number 5, and I think Beth was going to help with this, or Sandy, I'm not sure. Process for creation of our committee agenda.
And I'm not sure if you were talking more of this committee's agenda or just
Why don't you get a general one, because we got new board members here, and you know, whenever you're new, you can never hear anything too many times, because it's just so much information to absorb.
Right. The legislative agenda.
Turn your mic on there.
She's used to telling us that.
Yeah. Really. The legislative agenda is put together a little bit differently than the rest of the committees because a lot of the stuff is time sensitive. Many of the departments will work very closely with Jackie on issues, and you know how quickly bills move through, that there is the requirements, or not the requirements, but the opportunity for the legislative chair to work with leadership to provide a position on certain issues if it's falls in between the committee schedule and that. So usually for the legislative agenda, the departments will bring their requests forward just directly to us for the legislative agenda. And then we work with the speaker and the chair as far as what items are put on. For all the other agendas, we send out, at the end of the year, we send out to all the department heads and elected officials a time schedule when our committee requests are due, so that we can put them on for the first executive committee to be placed. And realizing, depending on how the month falls, some of those are actually after the actual committee falls. So based on the rules and what each committee, what their focus is, we place them on those certain agendas, and then working with the speaker to determine yes or no if they stay on. She might be aware of something that says, no, we're going to hold off on that this month, or put it onto this committee, and then it goes to the chair for their final review before the agenda is actually put together. So if anybody would have any items to go on an agenda, you can email staff, and we would go ahead and process that through the program.
Questions?
Okay?
That was pretty easy then.
Okay.
Brian is here, and so I'm going to back up to the state agenda a little bit, because I wanted him to come forward and talk a little bit about some of the things that Sheriff Kelly had, well, I assume Sheriff Kelly had put in our agenda last time. In the state agenda, this proposed legislation to change the language on the unlawful use of a weapon statute.
Yeah.
Can you answer us in
I'm
like
gonna defer
plain
to,
English what that means?
Dave Adams, who presented that last year.
Oh, good.
And
good.
he
Thanks,
can
Brian.
give you more information on that.
Morning, everybody.
Because you guys are like me, I look at some of this stuff and I can read the words, but I don't get a meaning from it. And so sometimes having a person present about it is helpful.
This is basically to get the Illinois state law in conformance with the federal law. 2004, there was something called the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act passed. And what it does is it provides the ability, the purpose of the act was to exempt qualified law enforcement officers from any state laws that prohibited them from carrying a concealed weapon 24 hours a day. The other thing that it does is the interstate passage. So some state laws allow it, some state laws don't. And so a qualified law enforcement officer could be carrying a weapon off duty, for example, in Indiana, and drive to Ohio and be breaking the law. So what this federal law does is it makes it nationwide. And Illinois law does not sort of provide for this.
So my question is, because I used to work in this area, I was a union organizer for federal workers. And we went to the prisons quite often to talk to the employees there. People would be surprised to know that a correctional officer in a prison does not carry any sort of weapon. That same correctional officer might be in the local Jewel on the south side of Chicago next weekend and run into the inmate that he was in charge of last month in the grocery store, and they were not allowed to carry a weapon. So we lobbied quite hard, and I think it was on this 2004 law that you're talking about, so that federal employees that were correctional officers could carry a concealed weapon. I didn't realize the interstate part, that across
Sort of a
state
side
lines
benefit
was
of the law.
different. So that happened at a federal level. How does this language for unlawful use of a weapon statute, I mean, you're saying our language in Illinois still prohibits it?
Correct.
How can that be? Wouldn't the feds trump the state?
Well, I would refer you to the state's attorney's office for an expert opinion on that. I'm certainly
She
not
left.
an attorney, but I do, just so you know, I do have an opinion from the state's attorney's office.
You weren't supposed to leave the room. That's okay.
I can say that we have consulted with the state's attorney's office prior to this, because I believe that you're correct. The federal law specifically says in there the purpose of this is to exempt you from state laws that prohibit it. However, there are state attorney's offices, Illinois state law, and it gets kind of muddy when you say which law should we follow. You talk about border control or any of these other issues, federalism. If there's a conflict, which way do we go? And so the purpose of modifying the state law removes that conflict. and it gets us in line with what the federal law. There is an appellate decision, by the way, in the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, where, as you say, the correctional officers in the DC Circuit were denied the ability, and they sued, they lost, they went to the appellate court and they won, saying that the state cannot redefine what qualified law enforcement officer is, and there is a specific definition in that federal law that includes, now, to be clear though, what we're proposing here in Illinois state law, we're not trying to go that far, we're just trying to go to county corrections officers, which is sworn county corrections officers that have the powers of arrest. So we're not trying to say, although I do believe that the federal law does provide for it, we're not trying to say that state Department of Corrections officers or federal parole law, things like that. We're not trying to muddy that all up. We're just trying to say state county corrections officers should be included because we have powers of arrest, we're sworn individuals, and we have the exact same firearms class that the police officers have.
And you have the right as an Illinois citizen to carry a concealed weapon anyway in this state. But you're talking about specifically is the crossing of a border?
No, I'm not specific. I'm talking about within the state of Illinois, it makes it lawful. And then the side benefit of what the federal law already provides. So, for example, I could leave the state of Illinois and legally carry in other states. I can't do it in this state. Which, you know, I'm a master firearms instructor for this state. I teach concealed carry for private citizens in this state. But what we're requiring in this state is for our department master firearms instructors. I teach at the police academy. I teach police officers how to shoot their guns, but I have to go pay an NRA instructor $150 to get certified to carry off duty. So it's kind of not logical.
Okay, now I think I've connected the dots. That's why I wanted you to come and talk, because these things are very complex. So you're saying that currently you have to pay the fee with the NRA to have the
Yes,
to have the off-duty.
That's according to Illinois state law. According to federal law, that's not required.
So that's all we're trying to remove, is that requirement.
Correct. We're just trying to get the Illinois state law to more coincide with what the federal law says. You know, I'm not trying to sort of carve a new path, you know, in law. This is existing in the federal law. We just have a conflict in our state.
And I'm just curious, how many people does this affect?
That's a good question.
In Will County alone, just our county, if you could give me a...
In our county, it would be 246.
And do you think all 246, well, I'm guessing they all would be interested in having...
I would say probably not all, but most. But, you know, it's sort of like any right, and this is, the federal appeals court argued that this is a substantive right. It's not just an option for the states to comply. But with any right, whether or not you exercise it should be your choice. So I can't say that everyone would, but I think many would be interested in having that freedom to exercise the right.
Just, for clarification's sake, what would be the argument against this?
Yeah, there's another question.
I'm not the person to ask for that because I don't understand it myself.
Did you go and lobby anyone personally, or, you know, talk with the legislators so that we might hear some of these?
I have not. I didn't want to circumvent this committee, and I like to have, you know, the county support and anything that we propose.
Anything in our book, feel free to go lobby. No, I'm kidding. You're a private citizen. You have the right to talk to your legislator. You do.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. Just as a representative of the sheriff's office, we try to go through the committee and make sure that everyone agrees with what we're putting forth as a county. But I do think that this is logical. I do know that there's also a pending class action suit that's going to be coming from Cook County. You know, there's no need for litigation. I think we can just all agree that our state law should. Maybe we can't all agree, but I think that if we could just mirror what the federal law already says, it just gets rid of the whole mess.
I have a question for you. You indicated that there can be at times, I would assume, a risk if you're off duty and you come across a former inmate. And I don't feel that it makes any sense that you would have to get NRA certification. I think that is, I don't think that makes sense. So I agree with that. But I'm curious as to your job and what you put your safety on the line and everyone else does. When the inmates are released, is everybody notified? Do you know where they locate to? do you have incidents periodically?
Yeah, there are incidents, there's definitely a history of that. And just to clarify on the NRA thing, it's not, you don't have, it's not a requirement from the state to get certified by an NRA instructor. That was just an example I gave. That's some of the folks that are qualified to teach the concealed carry class are NRA instructors. That's where they got their sort of expertise. But as far as incidents after someone gets released, that does happen. And as far as our access to information of where they go, that's probably available to us, but the turnover is so high. People that come and leave our facility and the state facilities, we never could keep up with it. And that's only one benefit of what this would do as far as our personal safety. We're interested in that, obviously. But also, when this was debated in Congress and passed by President Bush, one of the biggest benefits that was touted was safety of our nation. Post 9/11, having more good guys with guns out there, that when something happens, you talk about school shooters and everything else that's out there, having good guys with guns that are trained on how to use them is a benefit for all of us, I would think.
Jim?
I'm just trying to really understand the issue.
It's really hard to understand.
So obviously this has to do with gun rights and law enforcement. In this particular case, law enforcement, they have restrictions on law enforcement and concealed carry. And of course, some things have changed over the years because the federal government said, Illinois, you have to allow concealed carry. It's a federal. I wasn't aware of any real restrictions on active law enforcement carrying a weapon, concealed carry, anytime. But
They can, Jim, but they have to pay for it. And these guys want to...
just like that's what I'm asking.
Is this a correctional officer versus a deputy situation?
The active law enforcement has the right in the state to carry anytime.
Sworn.
I know it may be different for retired law enforcement, even though I know they also have the right to carry. But this coincides with the Illinois laws and the federal law and law enforcement's ability to carry into Illinois is the restrictions. Is that what you're saying?
Yes and no, but I think you brought up a good point that probably I could clarify for the committee because it's probably confusing. An active police officer or qualified retired police officer can carry currently, and that's within Illinois. The issue is how it's defined in the Police Training Act. And you're right, it is very confusing because it gets muddy in Illinois statute. In the Illinois Police Training Act, there's two sort of paths that are carved out in training for law enforcement. One is a police officer, one is a corrections officer. And within that definition, corrections officer is the state corrections officers, so IDOC, etc. And then in police, it's very specifically limited to police. However, peace officer can mean a bunch of different things in Illinois law. And so that's where the confusion sort of enters in. Our proposal here just asks that in the unlawful use of weapons statute in Illinois, the criminal statute, it says here's who shouldn't carry a gun and here's the penalties for it. I'm summarizing, obviously. And then there's 14, I think it is, exemptions underneath. And it has all sorts of exemptions for people. Police officers are included. We're just asking that number 15 would include county corrections officers as defined by the Police Training Act. So that the county corrections officers that are sworn, that have powers of arrest, that have received the same firearms training as police officers also be included in the list of exemptions. That's all we're asking for in the Illinois statute. I do believe that the DC Circuit of Appeals also agrees that the federal law is much more broad than that. We're just not going that far in our state, knowing the climate in Springfield.
Can you describe a county correction officer?
I could, but I think it would probably be better if I just went by this state definition, which is county corrections officer is any sworn officer of the sheriff who is primarily responsible for the control and custody of offenders, detainees, or inmates. It's at the top of page.
That's why I missed it. It's at the top of the other page. Okay. So this wouldn't necessarily be somebody who was inside the jail working in a pod.
No, it very specifically still would be controlled by your sheriff. In this case, because it's county corrections officer, so your sheriff can authorize or not authorize. The difference is now, if I went to the state's attorney's office, and we have as a sheriff's office, and said, is this legal within the Illinois state law? to allow our guys to carry off duty, and they're saying no because of the Police Training Act, things that I've mentioned. However, if you look at the federal law, it's pretty plain that they are covered. So there's a bit of a conflict there. Whether they would carry a firearm in the pod, as you say, that would not happen. The sheriff would prohibit it.
But an
So it would be just like you
employee,
described.
let's say an employee that worked in the pod, they're now off duty. They have the right to carry a concealed weapon.
Correct.
Even with Illinois law, they can cross the border or no?
Well, once they cross the border, Illinois law I don't think would apply, but you know, the federal law, what it does is it says that if you're a qualified law enforcement officer under the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act, you have the right to carry, and you're exempted from any state laws that prohibit it. That's what the federal law says. So you can go to any state as long as you're qualified and you carry the ID.
I think I'm asking the wrong question. Is a corrections officer that works in the pod a sworn officer?
Correct, in our county it is, yes.
Okay, that's the question I wanted to ask. So the deputies that work for the sheriff are sworn officers. They have the right to arrest somebody. I didn't know the people that worked in the correction, in the pods had the right to arrest.
They are sworn deputies. They do have the powers of arrest.
I did
They're in
not.
the sheriff's law enforcement pension.
Who does not have the right to arrest or the,
That's a
that
long
works for the
list.
sheriff's department? That's not clerical or...
Sort of, we kind of categorize it in sworn and non-sworn staff.
Yeah.
And so
We had
basically,
this discussion on the county
Yeah.
dealing with pensions and other things, and I don't think it was ever pointed out to us what a non-sworn officer is or does.
so it's all of our staff except for who you see in uniform, basically. I think that, we've taken an oath with the sheriff to uphold the Constitution, state of law, the laws of the state of Illinois, etc. Those are sworn staff, and that it carries with it different responsibilities. The county corrections officers that are sworn for Will County have also taken an oath, and part of that, they have the full authority and power of the sheriff.
I did not know that. I didn't know they had the powers of arrest. I would say like a federal protection officer has the power to arrest. They work with GSA, but a Bureau of Prisons correctional officer has no powers of arrest.
And it does get very muddy when you start to get into
Yeah.
state and federal bodies also.
Yeah.
And they're actually, if you really want to get into the weeds, there are county sheriff's offices that
That
also their corrections officers don't have, they're not sworn. And that's why in our proposal, we put in we use that definition of state, which is sworn with powers of arrest.
Anybody else have questions? Did
I
I
have
explain
one
anything?
Do these officers, are they ever called in to assist in emergencies within the community?
They have been, I can't think of the last time that it's happened.
But they can be.
But, like the tornado in Plainfield, I think in the Joliet tornado, if I'm not mistaken, they were called to help with some of those things also. We do transports outside of the jail. We drive to different agencies. We drive to, medical appointments, things like that.
So they'll be driving these inmates or prisoners and they won't be armed?
No, they are armed now. Yeah, they're currently armed, yeah.
Just not when they're off duty
That's correct.
necessarily.
That's correct.
Yeah, Jim?
I want to point out that everyone, all these officers can apply for concealed carry.
Right.
And go through a program. I think what you're saying is they shouldn't have to go through the program.
Right.
That they should have the right to carry because you've trained them. I mean, not you. Sheriff's Department's trained them. And of course, in concealed carry, there is probably a little bit of the laws. I think there's some other requirements and restrictions. I mean, every 5 years you have to reapply. They have to see whether you've had any charges of domestic violence or you've been arrested or whether.
So that might be one of the reasons why they're not jumping on this.
So, I think it should be pointed out, everybody has the right to apply to carry a weapon in this state. Now whether, and I don't know what kind of follow-up you do once you're in law enforcement, is that how you really know? I mean, does the sheriff say he's in domestic violence, and therefore I'm going to expect, your right to carry? I mean, I just want to point out, for all those, I'm a more gun right person. But in fairness, I also want good rules for everybody. And I don't want the wrong people to be carrying guns. So when we talk about these types of things, there are certain groups that are exempt from all these laws, that exempt from safeguards, because we trust them. You're law enforcement, and not to expand it to another group, you should understand, you're expanding that to another group that will be exempt from other aspects of concealed carry laws.
That's true, but I would like to mention also that the state has a body that regulates this, so even under the federal law, you have to carry an ID that's issued by a law enforcement agency that you prior worked for when you're retired, for example, when you're active, the agency that you currently work for. And then you have to qualify, for example, with your firearm periodically to make sure that you maintain proficiency with it. You also have to be in good standing with the agency. You have to be free of mental or physical limitations that would prevent you from using the weapons in a lawful way. So it's not like, there are no regulations, they're just different regulations. But certainly, law enforcement is held account as well as private citizens, as we would prefer it to be.
Interesting. Do you guys go through the same sort of updates or retesting? I mean, I know you talked about, qualifications, but are they the same as what someone who has a license for a concealed carry? Are the standards, or I don't know how I want to say this, the checks?
I was just going to ask something similar.
Yeah.
Basically, I'm sitting here assuming that the standards for a sheriff's deputy or someone in law enforcement is actually higher than maybe what the regular average citizen
I
has
can
to go
answer
through
for
in
Will
class,
County that ours are higher,
Yeah.
but I know that the state standard is lower than what we currently use. But the counties are able to set their own qualifications as long as they meet that minimum state standard, which is what, for example, IROC uses. IROC is the body Illinois has for retired officers concealed carry. IROC standards are lower than what we're using as an active officer, Will County Sheriff's Office. And it's also different than what the state uses at the police academies. The state police academies, whether that be in Champaign at the University of Illinois or Celia or Cook or whatever, those standards are always higher than what the state mandates because we like to be better than what's required.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Any more questions?
The firearms course itself that you go through the academy is the exact same whether it's police or corrections facility. It's a 40-hour class.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Any other new business? Anything somebody needs to tell me about or whatever? Public comment? Anybody? Hey, Rachel. Hello.
So I'll go left, but I understand what she's saying about the wish list, but one of the things you guys had mentioned was pulling the pet bill off, but there are several constituents in the Crestville and Joliet area that would be very upset about that. They did come and give a presentation to the board. The entire board did vote in favor of this bill. They have lobbied the city to change the laws on the city level. They continue to lobby the legislative at the state level. There's precedence to this. There are 17 cities that have passed this law, including Chicago, New York, San Francisco, and just recently in December, the entire state of California passed this law. So I mean, it may seem frivolous to some of the areas that aren't dealing with this, but in my area, this is a big deal. And if we don't try to push this at the state level, we will hear about it because they were under the impression that this county board did support the group who came and gave that presentation. So just want to make that.
Yeah, I'm not going to say what the group's going to decide. Obviously, the whole board is going to take a vote on the state agenda. I don't have anything.
So everyone knows.
I don't have anything against the bill or any citizen or constituent standing up and fighting for change. I just wasn't necessarily sure that this was something that was really, really. I don't want to use the word appropriate. Because everything's appropriate for the county. But just not as urgent as some of our other more pressing needs. And when we scatter ourselves and we have so many different things, and this kind of goes to Mike's point, where he was talking about, maybe we should have a separate little
And I
booklet
totally
just
agree.
for
Maybe there's side
transportation.
bills, or I agree. I think Mike had a great idea. I just need to make sure that everybody is aware that there are people in this county who very much feel that this is their priority, and I want
yes.
to speak for them.
And yes, and I do understand what you're saying very much. Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome.
Jim?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Rachel should understand, and all of the members should understand. You can make a motion to add anything you want to the agenda. right? I mean, we'll meet, if you want to make a motion to put this back on the state agenda, you have the ability to do that. Nobody's shut out.
Nope, nope.
So,
You can put, you know, on the state agenda, let's get rid of Jackie as the capital, or as the